back to another video. So today we are gonna make some homemade cinnamon rolls. So before we get started, I'm gonna list off the ingredients that you're gonna need for this recipe, and then we will get started. So you're gonna need milk, active dry yeast, sugar, eggs, canola oil or vegetable oil, salt, and flour. So those ingredients you're gonna need for the dough. And then for the filling, you're gonna need butter, brown sugar, and cinnamon. And then lastly, for the frosting, you're gonna need butter, vanilla, powdered sugar, and cream or milk, and then salt again. So those are the ingredients that we're gonna be using for each, the dough, the filling, and the frosting. So go ahead and start preparing those. You can rewind the video and go back if you need to hear the list again. So let's get started. We're gonna first start by actually doing the dough, but what we're gonna need first is you're gonna need 1 cup of warm milk, you're gonna need regular sugar, and then you're gonna need your yeast. So we are going to combine these 3 ingredients into a large bowl first, and then we're gonna let that sit for a couple minutes. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna add our milk. So again, it's 1 cup of lukewarm milk, 1 cup of warm milk. So go ahead and put that in your large bowl. Okay, now we're going to add our sugar. We need 1/2 cup of granulated sugar for this recipe. So go ahead and grab your 1/2 cup measuring cup. And I'm just going to stick this in there and then level it off with my knife. So we've got 1/2 cup of sugar. And then we need 2 1/4 teaspoons of active dry yeast. I think you can also use instant yeast for this if you don't have active dry yeast. So we're gonna need, there's 1 teaspoon, and then I'm doing my 2nd teaspoon here, so 2 1/4 teaspoons. There's 2. And then I'm gonna start with my 1/4 there. 1 1/4 teaspoon. Okay, put that in. So again, that was 1 cup of milk, 1/2 cup of sugar, and 2 1/4 teaspoons of yeast. So I'm just gonna grab a spoon here and we're just gonna mix this up a little bit. So make sure it's all kind of mixed in here. Okay, just so it's nice and mixed. Try and get your yeast off the side of your bowl here. Okay, now what we're gonna do is we're gonna let this sit for at least 2 minutes. So we're gonna let this sit for at least 2 minutes. That's going to activate the yeast. And then we're gonna come back and finish the rest of our dough. So go ahead, let this sit for 2 minutes, and then we'll move on to the next step. Okay, so now that our mixture has been sitting here for 2 minutes, we're gonna start adding the rest of our ingredients for our dough. So next we're gonna add our eggs, oil, and salt. So go ahead and grab those if you don't have those already. So let's start with the eggs. You need 2 eggs for this recipe. And remember, I always crack my eggs into a bowl first to make sure I get no shells. So here's the first egg. Okay, and the next one. Okay, so I've cracked both eggs into my bowl and I got no shells. So I'm just gonna put these directly into this bowl here. And I'm gonna put this aside. So next we're gonna add our oil. So you can use either vegetable oil or canola oil. I'm using vegetable oil, and we need 1/3 cup. So go ahead and grab your 1/3 cup measuring cup, and we're just gonna measure out 1/3 cup of oil. So go ahead and do that, and then add it to your large bowl here. Please pause the video if I'm going too fast at any time. So I'm gonna put my oil aside here. And now we're gonna add our salt. So this recipe calls for 1 teaspoon of salt. So go ahead and grab your 1 teaspoon here. I'm gonna dip my teaspoon in here and then level it off with my knife so it's nice and flat. And then we're gonna add our salt. Okay, so I'm actually gonna mix this using a fork just because I think that's gonna be a little bit easier for the moment. Just so I can make sure that I'm mixing in those eggs really well. Okay, so once you are done mixing those in, we're gonna actually start adding flour. So go ahead and grab your flour, and we're gonna add 3 cups of flour. So that's what we're gonna start off with. So again, I always use a spoon, and I measure out my flour by scooping my flour into my measuring cup. So again, that's 3 cups of flour that we're gonna start with. The recipe actually calls for, 5 cups of flour. Well, 4.5 to 5 cups. So there's 1 cup of flour in my bowl. I'm working on my 2nd cup here. Level it off with your knife. So there's the 2nd cup. So we're gonna add 1 more cup to start with. Okay, so that's 3 cups of flour. That's in my bowl here. So I'm just gonna put my flour aside a tiny bit here. So I'm gonna start mixing in this flour really gently, and I'm gonna actually start with my fork again, just for the time being. So we're gonna mix this until combined, and then we're gonna start adding the rest of our flour, but we're just starting with the 3 cups for now. So this recipe calls for 4.5 to 5 cups of flour. So I'm gonna start with 4.5 cups, and then we're gonna go from there. Okay, so we're just gonna mix this until it's all combined here, which I think it pretty much is. Okay. Okay. So now that is mixed in, I'm gonna go ahead and add my 4th cup. So this is my 4th cup of flour. Okay, so I've leveled that off with my knife. Okay, we're gonna mix this in, and then we're gonna see how much flour we need from here. So this is where we're really gonna see a dough start to form. And you're gonna wanna mix gently here because you're gonna get flour all over the counter if you don't. So we are seeing a dough start to form here. So just keep mixing. Okay, so that's doing pretty well. So I'm actually just gonna add only half a cup more flour, and then that's probably all I'm gonna need. I'm probably not gonna need the full 5 cups. So this is a total of 4.5 cups of flour. Perfect. So once your dough starts to form, we're probably gonna have to start mixing it with our hands because it's gonna be much easier. So it might be tricky to mix, but just try your best. Okay, so now I'm actually gonna go in with my hands. So make sure your hands are washed before you do this. And I'm just gonna start kind of pushing it against the bottom of the bowl here to get all that flour incorporated as best as you can. It's looking pretty good here. Okay, so I'm gonna show you this closer up here in just a second. Okay, so as you can see, we have formed a dough here. And what we're gonna do now, once you get to this stage, we are actually going to do some kneading. So we're gonna turn this out on a floured surface, and then we're gonna use our hands to knead the dough a little bit before we put it into a separate bowl to rise for 30 minutes. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna pause here. I need you to grab another empty bowl, and then we're going to start kneading our dough, and then we're gonna let it rise for a little bit. So go ahead and grab another bowl and a little bit of oil. Okay, so now we are ready to start kneading our dough. So I've got my flour here. What I'm gonna do is I'm just gonna take a little pinch of flour like that, and I'm going to lightly spread it on my counter here, just like that. So I'm gonna put my dough right on top. So kneading is something that we have done in another video, but in case you forgot, I'm gonna give you a little reminder. So you're gonna use the palms of your hands to lightly push the dough down. We're gonna turn it a quarter way, flip it over a tiny bit, fold it over a tiny bit, and push down again, and then repeat the same process. So in a faster motion, it looks like this. So it's really quite simple once you get the hang of it. And then what you may need is you may need to reflour your surface every once in a while, which is quite common. So again, flip it over a tiny bit, push down with the palms of your hands. Flip over, push down. Flip over, push down. Turning just a tiny bit each time. So you're gonna continue doing this until you get a soft dough which forms. And you'll know when that is because your dough will become very smooth as you continue kneading it. So it's already coming together much, much nicer than it was before we started kneading. So as you can see, it is much smoother than it was. Okay, so I'm gonna pinch the flour here and add some to my surface. And you're just gonna continue doing this for probably about 1 more minute. Okay. So as you can see, my dough is really nice and smooth, and that's exactly what we want. So this part isn't in your recipe, but this is something that I like to do when I make anything like cinnamon rolls. So what I'm gonna do is I'm going to take a tiny, tiny bit of oil and a clean bowl, and I'm just gonna add the tiniest drop of oil in the bowl here. Tiny bit more than that. Okay. I'm just gonna put that aside. Now, you're gonna grab a small piece of paper towel or napkin, and I'm just going to coat my bowl here with that oil. Okay, just like that. So now we're gonna add our dough to this bowl, and you're gonna want to grab a dish towel, and then what you're gonna do is you're gonna cover your bowl and we're gonna let it sit for 30 minutes. So we're just gonna let this rise for 30 minutes. You may notice that it doesn't rise a whole lot, but that's okay. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna put this aside for 30 minutes, and then we will come back to make the filling and to shape our dough into our cinnamon rolls. So I will see you in 30 minutes. Okay, so as your dough is sitting for 30 minutes, I'm gonna quickly go over the next few ingredients that you're gonna need. So we're gonna start with the filling when we come back. So the filling requires 3 simple ingredients. It requires half a cup of butter, which is 1 full stick of butter, half a cup of butter melted. So you are gonna need to completely melt this in the microwave. And then we need brown sugar, and then you need cinnamon. So you're gonna gather those 3 ingredients for the filling. And then what we're also gonna do when we come back is we're gonna roll out our dough into a rectangle-like shape. So what you're gonna need for that is you're gonna need to grab your flour, and then you're gonna need to grab a rolling pin. What you're also gonna need for the filling is you're gonna need a medium-sized bowl to mix your ingredients in. So those are a few things to get prepared for before we come back and start rolling out our dough and making our filling. So gather these 3 ingredients, plus your flour, your rolling pin, and a medium-sized bowl. So gather those and then we'll get started. Okay, so at this point, your dough should have been rising for 30 minutes. So as I previously mentioned, don't be too concerned if it hasn't risen that much, because it won't rise too much. So now we're gonna start on the filling for our cinnamon rolls. So as I mentioned just before this, is you're gonna need half a cup of butter melted for your filling. So in here I have half a cup of butter melted, and this is about a medium-sized bowl. So make sure you melt your butter in a medium-sized bowl. Again, half a cup of butter. So now to our butter, we are going to add 1 1/4 cups of brown sugar. So that's 1 cup plus 1/4 cup. So with brown sugar, I'm just gonna take my 1 cup scoop and just scoop it in here like that. And then I'm gonna use the back of a spoon to pack it down. Just like that. So there's 1 cup of brown sugar. Okay, now we're gonna do 1/4 cup. So again, stick your 1/4 cup in here, pack it down with your spoon, and then add it to your bowl. So that's 1 1/4 cups of brown sugar. So I'm just gonna put this aside. Okay, so you need a lot of cinnamon for this, which might be a bit tricky to measure out, but we will do our best. So we need 2 tablespoons of cinnamon. So I have my big 1 tablespoon here. I'm just gonna start dumping my cinnamon onto this, and I'm gonna start leveling it off with the knife until I get a tablespoonful. Okay, so that's a little bit over a tablespoon. So what I'm gonna try and do is I'm going to try and put this back in here as best as I can without spilling it. Okay, so there's 1 tablespoon of cinnamon. And now we need to measure out 1 more tablespoon. So again, I'm just gonna dump it. Measure it out. And it actually looks like that's gonna be about a tablespoon. I'm just gonna add a tiny, tiny bit more. Okay. Perfect. Okay, so that's another tablespoon. So in this bowl right now, you should have 1/2 cup of butter, 1 1/4 cups of brown sugar, and 2 tablespoons of cinnamon. So I have a fork in here and we're just gonna mix this together with our fork until it's mixed really well. So it's just a super simple filling. So I'm just gonna set this aside here. So mix it until it's really well combined. Okay, so it should look like that. It will look a little bit grainy. Don't worry about that. That looks absolutely perfect. Okay, so now that we've made the filling, I'm just gonna set it aside. Okay, so now we're on to the next part where we are going to start actually rolling out our dough. So for this part, you're gonna need your dough, of course, and then you're gonna need a rolling pin and flour. So the first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna take a healthy pinch of flour and just spread it in front of us on our counter. So I'm just gonna make sure that I've got a good portion of my counter covered with flour here because we're gonna roll this out pretty big. So I'm just gonna set my flour aside here. Okay, so I'm gonna turn my dough out onto this surface here. Okay, so according to your recipe, you have to roll out your dough. This is very approximate. Do not worry about getting this down to the exact measurement that they say. It's gonna be about 24 inches wide and about 18 inches tall. So what it's gonna be is it's basically gonna be a giant rectangle. So it's not gonna be a perfect rectangle. So don't worry too much about that. So what I'm gonna start doing is I'm actually going to start my rectangle by having my dough, I'm just gonna use my hands to pat my dough out to kind of just a long shape here. I'm just gonna pat it out so that it's just a long piece of dough. I'm gonna push it together, push it out. Okay, and this is gonna help us start our rectangle piece. Okay, so now that that's patted out to kind of a rectangle form, we are going to start rolling it out. So I'm gonna move it over here. It is going to get quite large. Okay, so I'm gonna start by just rolling it out on the sides. So my dough is going to be quite big because we've got quite a bit of dough here. It's gonna make quite a bit of cinnamon buns. Okay, I'm just gonna flip this over now and I'm gonna roll on the other side. Okay, so yes, it's going to get quite long, as you can see. And now I'm gonna start rolling up. And this is literally what it means by rectangle. It's obviously not going to be a perfect rectangle with sharp corners. Okay, so that's getting very long. I'm gonna flip it over again. I like to flip it over once in a while because I feel like it helps it stick to the counter a little bit better. And don't be afraid to get in there and use your hands at any point. Okay, so we're gonna keep rolling it out both ways. And you're gonna want it to be relatively thin. I'm gonna say probably about an inch to half an inch. Okay, so that's very long, as you can see. I'm gonna start rolling it up again. This part will take a while to get it to the point where it needs to be at. Okay. So basically, I don't want you to worry too much about needing it to be a particular length. You just want it to be so that it's shorter in height, but much longer in width. Okay. Okay. So I think this is just about done here. And I'm actually just gonna go in and use my hands now because I'm pretty happy with the length and height of this. So I'd aim for, let's say, half an inch in thickness, approximately. I'm gonna move it over so you can see the whole dough. It's spread out a ton. So now that you can see the whole dough here. Okay, I'm just gonna pat it out on the sides a little bit more. Okay. Okay, there we are. So, it's obviously clearly not a perfect rectangle, and it doesn't need to be. But it is going to be really quite long, as you can tell. This is going to make quite a few cinnamon buns. So I'm just going to move it over one more time so that you can see it a bit better. Okay. So just pat it out until you are happy with it. Okay, so now that we are at this point, I need you to go ahead and grab a spoon. So I'm gonna use a larger spoon, and we're gonna go ahead and grab our filling. And this is where we are going to spread our filling onto our dough here. Okay, so I'm just gonna start kind of dolloping my filling across my dough here. I'm gonna start with a spoon, but I might need to shift to a spatula if a spoon isn't quite working as well as I'd like. Okay, so now I'm just gonna start spreading my filling using the back of my spoon. And it will take a while to get it to spread nice and evenly. Okay. So as you're spreading this, what I want you to do is leave a tiny gap at the top here where there is no filling. So what I'm gonna get you to do is continue spreading this onto your dough until it is quite even all over your dough. So keep spreading until it has covered basically the entire dough. Come back and then we will start rolling up our cinnamon rolls. Okay, so now that our filling is spread evenly onto our dough, we are going to start rolling it up. So what I need you to grab before we start is you're gonna need to grab a knife that has a serrated edge here, which means just an edge with little bumps. And then you're gonna need to grab a large cookie sheet that is already sprayed with Pam. So go ahead and do that now. Okay, so very carefully, we are going to start rolling up from the bottom up. So try and do this as carefully as possible. We're gonna start slowly lifting up the bottom all the way. And now we're gonna slowly start rolling it up. It should roll quite easily and nicely for you. Just like that. Okay. Perfect. So I'm gonna try and move this down a little bit so you can see it better. Okay, so that's perfect. Okay, so it's gonna look just like that. So now what we're gonna do is we're actually gonna cut this into 12 pieces. We're gonna try and get 12 pieces. So this is where you're gonna need to grab your knife, measure out approximately what you think is the middle. Make a tiny mark with your knife. Now you're gonna go ahead and look at 1/2 of it. Cut 1/2 of it in half again and make a mark. Do the same thing on the other side. So I'm looking at just this half and I'm gonna find the middle and make a mark. And I'm gonna do the exact same thing with each of these now. I'm gonna find the halfway mark and make a little mark in between each. Okay, so now we're at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So now again, we're gonna do, so we are going to cut these in half again. So each cinnamon roll is gonna be about 2 inches. Okay, just like that. Once you have it all marked out, you're gonna actually cut the cinnamon roll. It's gonna look like that. And then you're gonna put the cut side down onto your cookie sheet. The ends are obviously going to look a bit different from the middle. As you can see, that looks really nice there. And we're gonna space them out a few inches in between each. So I'm gonna do like that. So just keep cutting them. Just like that. So those are looking really good. So I'm gonna do 3 on one side and then 4 on this side. And it looks like I'm gonna get actually more than 12 cinnamon rolls with mine, which might be the case for you as well. Okay, we're just gonna fill this cookie sheet with 4 more cinnamon rolls, and then we'll put the rest on another one. So just keep cutting your cinnamon rolls and placing them on the pan. Awesome. One more. Okay. So I'm going to put these on another cookie sheet afterwards. So now that you have your cinnamon rolls out on your pan here, what you need to do is actually grab some saran wrap. So you're gonna grab some saran wrap, and what we're gonna do is you're gonna cover this completely with saran wrap, and then you're gonna set this aside for another half an hour. So cover your entire tray and cinnamon rolls with saran wrap, and then let it sit for 30 minutes. This is going to allow them to rise just a tiny bit more before we put them in the oven. You're not going to see a huge difference, but it is an important step. So cover this with plastic wrap, set it aside for 30 minutes. I'm going to come back and I'm going to give you further baking instructions. So I'll see you in half an hour. Okay, so my cinnamon rolls have been sitting aside with plastic wrap over top for 30 minutes. So what you can do now is preheat your oven to 350 degrees Fahrenheit. Once it's ready to go, you're gonna put these in the oven for 20 minutes or until they are golden brown. And then after that, you're gonna make the icing. What you're gonna need to get ready for the icing is a 1/4 cup of butter that's melted, a teaspoon of vanilla, 2 cups of powdered sugar, and about 3 tablespoons of milk or cream, and then a pinch of salt. So that's what we're gonna make right after these go in the oven. You can make them while they're in the oven or out of the oven. It's totally up to you. If you want to make them when they are out of the oven, just pause the video, let these finish baking, and then continue afterwards. So we are on to one of the last steps here. So go ahead and put these in the oven and then get prepared to make your icing. Okay, so the last step of this recipe is to actually just make the icing. So we're gonna start with a 1/4 cup of melted butter. So go ahead and melt a 1/4 cup of butter in the microwave. Now we're gonna add 2 cups of powdered sugar. 2 cups. So I'm just gonna scoop in my powdered sugar into my cup here. And level it off with my knife. So there's 1. And here's the next one. So there's 2 cups of powdered sugar. We're gonna put that aside. And now we're gonna add 1 teaspoon of vanilla. So 1 teaspoon of vanilla. Okay. Next, we're gonna add the tiniest pinch of salt. So I just took a pinch of salt and added that. And now we're gonna start mixing it with a fork. And then we're gonna add either your choice of cream or milk. And we're gonna need about 3 tablespoons. So we're gonna just mix this in as best we can. And now we're gonna add about 3 tablespoons of milk or cream. I'm gonna add 1 at a time. So that was 1. This is the second one. And it's gonna get thinner each time you add a tablespoon. I'm using a fork because I think it's the easiest way to get all of the lumps out. And we're gonna add 1 last tablespoon. Okay. So now I'm going to mix in my last tablespoon. I'm using cream, if you were wondering. Perfect. So this is what I have so far, and this is actually the perfect consistency. So it's gonna be more of a frosting than it is an icing, and that's what we want, because you wanna be able to put just a small teaspoon on top of your cinnamon bun and have it just melt down very slowly. So I've gotten rid of all of my bumps here, so it's nice and smooth. Just like that. So that is how to make the frosting. If you want more frosting, you can just double the recipe the next time you make it. So yeah, that's all there is to it. So now that your cinnamon buns are out of the oven, make sure they are cooled off, add some frosting, and enjoy. So please send me a picture of your cinnamon rolls. I'd love to see how you made them. And then I will see you next time.